In front of 1,000 stunned guests in Baton Rouge, Senator John Kennedy screamed about law and order. Moments later, he erupted in fury, ordering Jasmine out of the hall. But she refused to move, holding her ground for 4,000 Louisiana voters who had been silenced. 30 years under Kennedy's iron grip collided head-on with 60 seconds of her unstoppable truth. When raw power crashes into fearless defiance, who will be the one forced to leave? Stay with us, this is a story worth every second of your time. The conference room pulsed with authority. Banners reading "Freedom and Constitutional Responsibility" hung like commandments over the heads of more than 1,000 attendees, state officials, conservative donors, sharp-suited lobbyists, and voters dressed for power. The stage, draped in the American flag, elevated Senator John Kennedy above them all. He gripped the podium like a preacher before a loyal congregation. "America needs hard laws and harder discipline," he declared, voice booming. "We don't preserve liberty by handing it to anyone who forgets what built this country." Then it happened. From the back doors, two figures appeared, unexpected, uninvited, unmistakably out of place. Jasmine Crockett moved with quiet precision, dressed in all black, her eyes sharp as broken glass. Beside her walked a soft-spoken man in a gray blazer, a civil rights advocate from New Orleans. Both wore silver guest badges issued by the organizers, but they weren't part of the show. No one had planned for this entrance. No one was ready. As Jasmine walked down the center aisle, murmurs stirred like wind through dry leaves. A few heads turned, then more. Gasps spread across the rows. Some attendees recognized her instantly. "That's Jasmine Crockett from Texas," a woman whispered. "She grilled a federal judge on live TV last spring." Another man leaned over and muttered, "Didn't she go toe-to-toe with MTG in Congress?" "What the hell is she doing here?" Kennedy paused mid-sentence. His brow tightened. The weight of the room shifted as all eyes followed Jasmine's deliberate steps. She never broke stride. She never looked away. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't hiding. The silence from the stage grew louder than the speech ever was. Kennedy leaned slightly forward into the microphone, voice now laced with irritation. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "what exactly are you doing here? You're not on the program." The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. A few people chuckled nervously. Others exchanged glances, unsure if they were watching a disruption or the beginning of something bigger. Jasmine stopped halfway down the aisle. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lift a hand. She simply stood there, staring at Kennedy, not defiant, not apologetic, just present. Present enough to throw the entire room off balance. The air turned heavy, almost electric, as Jasmine stood motionless in the center aisle, her presence now louder than any speech ever delivered on that stage. The spotlight hadn't touched her, yet she lit up the room by simply refusing to back down. Eyes locked on Kennedy like a sniper tracking a target. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't apologize. A woman in control of herself in a room designed to make her feel small. And that in itself was an act of war. Senator Kennedy's jaw clenched. For a brief second, his face betrayed something, not quite anger, but disruption. He wasn't used to silence fighting back, and Jasmine's silence was weaponized. His hands snapped forward, slicing through the tension like a blade through linen. "This is not a stage," he shouted, voice sharp and unyielding. "Escort her out now." The command hit like a slap across the room. A few reflexive claps echoed from the front row, their sound forced and misplaced like a laugh at the wrong punchline. Donors, aides, and party operatives looked around nervously, trying to read the room. But what they found was confusion, tension. Phones began rising like slow-burning torches, pulled from purses, blazers, and back pockets. Even under signs that clearly banned all recording, even with security watching, people wanted to remember this moment. Not through filtered sound bites, but in raw, shaking footage. Security hesitated. These weren't protesters. This wasn't some staged interruption by students or radicals. This was a sitting congresswoman, with credentials, with presence, with a stare so sharp it could have peeled paint off the back wall. The guards looked at each other, unsure who should take the first step toward her and who would take the blame if things went wrong. And then she spoke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. But her voice cut clean across the entire room, sliding under every table and chair like a razor drawn in silence. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," she said, standing perfectly still, as if gravity itself dared not move her. "I came to say one thing, one truth you've been avoiding for too damn long." She didn't blink. She didn't tremble. She just let the words hang there, like a thread tied to something none of them wanted to pull. But they couldn't look away. Kennedy's smile returned tighter now, more forced. It was the kind of smile politicians wear when the crowd isn't clapping, and they're trying to pretend they don't notice. He leaned back toward the microphone, clearing his throat just enough to sound amused but not rattled. "1 minute from you," he quipped, drawing the words out like poison through a straw, "could put this entire room to sleep." Laughter followed, not spontaneous, not real. It limped from the lips of people who weren't sure if they were supposed to laugh or not. But Jasmine didn't laugh. She didn't even twitch. Her eyes stayed locked on him. Not with rage, not even defiance, but with the calm, eerie precision of someone who didn't come to argue. She came to dismantle, and everyone in that room could feel it even if they didn't yet understand how. The laugh died quicker than it started. It hung in the air like smoke from a cheap fire, thin, awkward, and quickly choking the room. No one followed up. No one clapped. Kennedy's smirk faded just a bit too slowly, as if even he realized he'd overplayed his hand. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was loud. Loud with tension, loud with judgment, loud with eyes that now began shifting away from Jasmine and toward him. People in the middle rows fidgeted. Some crossed their arms. A woman in a navy dress whispered to her husband without taking her eyes off the stage. A young volunteer gripped his notepad like a lifeline. Jasmine hadn't moved an inch, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't broken decorum, and yet Kennedy looked like the only one in the room dangerously close to losing control. His own reaction was becoming the story. The air was tight as piano wire. The weight of it pressed on Kennedy's shoulders. He looked out across the crowd, faces that just minutes ago were nodding to his every word, now frozen, waiting, watching, judging. His jaw flexed. His fingers tapped the podium once, twice. Then finally, with the tone of someone swallowing a bitter pill, he leaned into the mic and muttered, "All right, 1 minute, then you leave." No applause, just a shift in the atmosphere. Like everyone knew, the clock had started and that 1 minute might be the most dangerous of his career. Kennedy's words barely had time to settle before the silence returned, this time heavier, sharper, filled with something even more dangerous than noise, anticipation. He had given her a minute, but in doing so, he'd handed her the floor, and everyone in that room could feel it. The power didn't shift, it cracked. An aide from the event staff moved quickly, handing Jasmine a handheld microphone. She didn't thank him. She didn't move toward the stage. Instead, she remained exactly where she stood, just to the side of the raised platform, close enough to be heard, far enough to stay uninvited. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't grandstanding. It was a quiet decision to speak on her own terms, not his. The room was dead silent. You could hear a chair leg scrape lightly against the carpet. The hum of the overhead lights felt deafening in comparison. Jasmine raised the mic with calm, steady hands, her voice cutting through the stillness like a scalpel. "I come from another state," she said, clear and firm. "But I'm here for the people of Louisiana, the ones pushed out of the voting booth by the very law you chose to protect." Kennedy froze. His posture stiffened, his jaw clenched so tightly the veins in his neck surfaced. The front row donors, state delegates, old colleagues leaned forward, suddenly unsure if they were watching a debate or the beginning of a reckoning. Jasmine didn't flinch. She wasn't just speaking, she was unveiling. She took a breath, eyes never leaving his. "Louisiana has required voter ID since 1997, she continued, but recent changes made it stricter, so strict that an 86-year-old woman, Mrs. Louise, was denied her ballot because all she had was her Medicare card." Gas flickered across the room. A woman in a red jacket whispered to her neighbor. A man near the aisle folded his arms but didn't look away. The silence cracked. Voices stirred. Whispers rippled like heat waves. It wasn't just murmurs of disbelief, it was recognition. They weren't just hearing about a law. They were seeing who it hurt. And for the first time that afternoon, the room wasn't looking at Kennedy for answers. They were looking at Jasmine and realizing she had them. The mention of Mrs. Louise still hung in the air like a storm cloud refusing to pass. People hadn't even finished processing the weight of that one name. One woman denied her voice when Kennedy lashed out, the way a cornered man does. His voice rose not in confidence, but in urgency, the kind of rise that sounds like control slipping through fingers. "We're protecting the integrity of the vote," he snapped, both palms gripping the podium now, as if holding onto it could somehow anchor what was left of his authority. "We are safeguarding civil rights from voter fraud." His tone carried heat, but no substance. The words came out fast, too fast, like a defense rehearsed so often it had lost all meaning. He wasn't responding to Jasmine. He was retreating behind the same old wall of excuses. But Jasmine didn't blink. Her expression didn't change. She waited stone still and unshaken until the last echo of his words had faded into the high ceilings. Then, with the precision of someone who came armed not with noise but facts, she raised the mic again. Her voice didn't need to shout to pierce. It was colder now, sharper. "According to a 2020 report by the Department of Justice," she said, each syllable like the tightening of a noose, "the rate of voter fraud in the United States is less than 0.3%. She let the number settle. She let it twist. Then she looked directly at Kennedy, no smirk, no anger, just something far more dangerous. Calm conviction. "Senator," she continued, her tone tightening, "would you like me to read it out loud for the room?" It was a clean strike. One line, surgical and silent, that left everything else in ruins. The room didn't gasp out of theater. It recoiled out of truth. People turned in their seats. A woman in pearls stiffened. A man with a state lapel pin glanced down at his notes like they might save him. Somewhere near the back, a staffer muttered, "That's real. That's the actual number." The blow hadn't just punctured Kennedy's defense, it had collapsed the narrative around him. The safeguard he spoke of had just been exposed as a shield with no threat behind it. Worse yet, Jasmine hadn't used emotion to make her point. She'd used math. Cold, federal, irrefutable math. And in a room built on political theater, nothing stings harder than a fact that can't be spun. The number landed like a hammer, and before the echoes died, Jasmine reached into her folder and pulled out a stiff, poster-sized board clipped at the corners. Black lines divided it into columns, names redacted, precincts listed, the reason column circled in thick marker like a bruise. She lifted it chest high so the front rows could see the neat rows that looked less like paperwork and more like a roll call of silenced voices. Her eyes never left the stage as she angled the board to catch the house lights. "This is a list of 19 eligible voters in East Baton Rouge County who were denied ballots in the midterm election reason, no driver's license or matching utility bill." Chairs creaked. A throat cleared. Somewhere, a pen stopped tapping. Kennedy held still for a beat, the kind of pause that feels longer because everyone is measuring it. Jasmine did not lower the board. She let the weight of each empty box sink in, then pressed the point through with a voice that didn't waver. "Stopping one imaginary case of fraud in exchange for 19 real ballots. That is not election protection, it is manipulation." The words didn't shout. They cut clean, final, impossible to mishear. The weight of Jasmine's last line hadn't fully settled when she shifted again, slow, steady, as if peeling back the final layer of restraint. The board with the list of rejected voters was lowered to her side, and in its place she drew a small photo from the folder pressed against her ribs. It wasn't a prop. It wasn't oversized or flashy. It was a simple, but the way she held it tenderly, deliberately commanded more attention than any headline ever could. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The room leaned in before she said a word. Jasmine turned slightly so the front rows could see. The photo captured an elderly black woman sitting outside a polling station. Her posture was straight, her hands folded carefully over her purse. But it was her face that spoke volumes, lined, composed, but visibly humiliated. Standing next to her, half turned away, was a poll worker gesturing to another voter, ignoring the woman as though she didn't exist. The implication didn't need to be explained. It was written all over the scene. "She used to be a school teacher," Jasmine began, and her voice dropped just enough to shift the mood from confrontation to quiet devastation. She taught during wartime. She can't drive anymore, but she's held on to her voter registration card since 1972. The room didn't just fall silent, it sank into it. It was the kind of silence that made people blink slower, sit straighter, feel smaller. Even the lights above seemed to dim under the weight of that story. There was no spin, no accusation, just a fact so painfully human, it left nothing to hide behind. In the front row, a woman, white hair curled tight, blazer crisp, lowered her eyes and stared down at her lap. She didn't move. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted her wedding ring, though she didn't seem to notice. Something in the story hit too close. Something in the photo refused to let her look away. Kennedy's body tightened behind the podium. His hands gripped the sides now, white-knuckled. The smirk he'd tried earlier was long gone, replaced by something harder to name: frustration, maybe, or fear. But when he finally spoke, it was with the feeble edge of a man trying to build distance he no longer had. "I didn't write the laws in that parish," he said, and the room heard it for what it was: a dodge. Jasmine's answer came not with fire, but with ice. Her voice was even, her expression locked in focus. "But you voted to approve the law that silenced voters like her, and now you're hiding from it." That was the final cut. Clean, undeniable, and more brutal for how calmly it was delivered. The entire hall froze not in confusion, but in clarity. No one shifted. No one looked at their phones. The only movement came from the photo in Jasmine's hand, still held up, still visible, still damning. That one image had shattered every defense Kennedy had left, and everyone in that room knew they had just watched the truth walk in, take its place, and speak for those who never got the mic. The room was a powder keg, silent but electric, still but thrumming. Every breath felt held, every glance was fixed. Jasmine had already cut deep, and everyone could sense she was winding back for one final strike. But no one expected what came next. Without a single word, Jasmine reached slowly into her jacket pocket, eyes never leaving Kennedy. The audience watched her every movement alert, breathless, like a room full of people staring at the edge of a loaded trigger. She pulled out her phone, calmly, deliberately, and placed it beside the small black Bluetooth speaker that had been sitting unnoticed on the side of the podium. With a quick flick of her thumb, the device powered on with a soft chime. People leaned in instinctively. No one dared speak. Jasmine tapped her screen once. A dial tone echoed through the speaker. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, simple, real. That made it more terrifying, because whatever was about to happen, it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't theatrical. It was live, and it was lethal. The first ring passed, then the second. Then a voice, filtered but clear, came through the speaker. "East Baton Rouge Registrar's Office. May I help you?" Jasmine's tone was calm, almost clinical. "Yes, I'm calling to confirm a voter eligibility incident involving Mrs. Louise of East Baton Rouge during the last midterm election. Can you verify the details?" There was a short pause, just long enough to tighten the noose around the air. Then the voice answered, "Yes, we can confirm. Mrs. Louise was not allowed to vote because her documents didn't match. The incident was formally recorded." That was it. That was all it took. The room didn't react right away, not because it didn't hit hard, but because it hit so precisely no one knew what to do with it. It was like the truth had just walked into the room, uninvited, unfiltered, and undeniable. Somewhere in the middle rows, a woman's hand went to her chest. A man in a suit shifted awkwardly in his chair, looking to Kennedy, then to Jasmine, then down at his lap. A staffer at the back covered his mouth. He wasn't coughing, he just didn't know where to look. Jasmine didn't say a word. Not yet. Instead, she reached into her folder one last time and produced a slim, silver remote. She turned toward the screen behind Kennedy. One press and the projector flickered to life. The crowd turned as one. A campaign ad began to play low, bright, polished. It was Kennedy, from just 2 years earlier. He stood in front of an American flag, shaking hands, rolling up his sleeves, walking through a church parking lot with voters in tow. And then came the line, crisp and clear, piped through the speaker in Kennedy's own voice. "I promise you this no lawful voter will be denied their right to vote in the state of Louisiana. Click. The screen went black. Jasmine turned back toward the stage, slowly, like a courtroom lawyer delivering the final exhibit to the jury. Her eyes never blinked. Her voice, when it came, wasn't raised, it was refined to a blade's edge. "Senator," she said so clearly that it cut through the stillness like a shot, "would you like to apologize to Mrs. Louise now, or should the entire room ask for you?" Time stopped. Kennedy didn't speak. He didn't move. His fingers clung to the microphone like it was the only thing tethering him to the moment, but even the steel couldn't hide the tremor now running through his hand. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came. His throat twitched. His eyes darted for a flicker of a second left, right, forward, but nowhere to land. There was no safe corner in that room anymore. Jasmine stood there motionless, a mountain in the eye of a hurricane she had created. She didn't need to say another word, because in that exact second, power changed hands. Then came the sound that broke everything. Applause. Not polite, not hesitant, but volcanic. It erupted from the back first, a group of attendees who had said nothing all day, suddenly on their feet. Then the center, the rows that had been stiff with discomfort, now surged into motion. Hands slapped, feet stomped, voices rose. And in the front row, even a few old men who had worn smirks earlier now sat still, blinking, their hands on their laps, unmoving. The applause wasn't for drama, it was for truth. And the sound of it, raw, rising, rolling forward like a tidal wave, was deafening. Kennedy remained frozen. The same man who had once commanded this stage with sound bites and slogans was now a statue, hollow, silent, eclipsed. His knuckles stayed white on the mic, but it no longer mattered. Jasmine wasn't looking at him anymore. She didn't need to. She had already said everything she needed to say, and now the room was saying the rest for her. And somewhere in that crowd, someone whispered what everyone else was thinking. She just ended him in 60 seconds flat. The thunder of applause didn't just fill the room, it shook it. Even as hands clapped and chairs scraped the floor, there was something sharper in the air, something irreversible. The shift wasn't just audible, it was structural. Power had moved, the balance had tilted, and everyone inside that conference hall knew they had just witnessed something no program schedule could have planned for. Then, as the clapping finally began to taper off into silence, reluctant, echoing silence, a soft chime cut through the space. The house PA system activated with a low hum, and the voice that followed wasn't from the stage. It came from the back corner near the technical booth. Controlled, nervous, official. "Ladies and gentlemen," said the conference director, his voice shaking slightly despite the rehearsed tone, "we are going to temporarily pause the remaining portion of today's programming." There was a beat of stunned confusion, no one moved. The voice continued. "Due to developments during this session, and in response to overwhelming attendee feedback, the committee will schedule an open dialogue between both parties. Details to follow shortly." And just like that, it was done. There was no resistance, no protest, because at that point, what could anyone say? The schedule no longer mattered. The hierarchy was no longer intact, and the man who once commanded the room from behind a podium now stood at its center, muted, exposed, and visibly shaken. Kennedy didn't speak. He didn't even look up. The grip on his microphone had gone slack, his posture slightly collapsed, like the energy required to maintain his armor had finally run out. He blinked slowly, jaw tight, eyes cast downward, as if searching for some version of himself that still held control. But there was none. Behind him, aides approached cautiously, whispering without words. One reached for the notes on his podium. Another touched his elbow, subtle, like coaxing a man down from a ledge. Kennedy didn't resist, but he didn't respond either. He stepped off the stage with the stiffness of a man walking off a battlefield, his body intact, but his legacy torn wide open. As he disappeared behind the velvet curtain, a journalist from a regional outlet leaned in with a handheld recorder. "Senator, do you have any comment on the verification call or the voting incident involving Mrs. Louise?" Kennedy didn't stop, didn't flinch, didn't even turn his head. His silence was louder than any headline that would be printed by morning. The media scrum outside the stage area hesitated, unsure whether to pursue him or stay rooted to the moment that had just unfolded. A cameraman lowered his rig and whispered to a colleague, "We're not reporting a conference anymore. We're reporting a collapse." Back inside the hall, Jasmine remained exactly where she had stood all along. She hadn't moved from her spot at the edge of the stage, not even a step. Her phone was back in her pocket. The speaker was off. The projector screen was blank. And yet all eyes were still on her. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't smiling. She was still holding the photograph of Mrs. Louise. And somehow in that moment, that was what held the crowd, still not the applause, not the argument, but the woman in the picture who had been silenced without shouting, whose dignity had been folded into policy and buried in bureaucracy. It was Jasmine who had dug it out and made them all look. Slowly, the room began to exhale. Conversations started to ripple, small at first, but unmistakable. People turned to each other not to gossip, but to process. Words like voter suppression, that phone call, and he had no answer, floated from row to row. On the far right side of the room, a senior organizer from a conservative think tank closed his leather binder and whispered to his assistant, "That wasn't a debate. That was a dissection." Near the back, an elderly couple who had come just to listen stood up, arm in arm. The woman, quiet throughout the event, looked toward Jasmine one last time and said softly, "She didn't just speak. She showed us what we were afraid to see." Meanwhile, on the edge of the stage, a member of the event staff, a young volunteer in a navy vest, approached Jasmine with cautious reverence. "Would you like to exit through the back hall?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine looked at him for a long second. Then, without nodding, without speaking, she turned her attention back to the crowd. She raised the photo of Mrs. Louise one last time, not to make a statement, not to provoke, but to remind them that this moment wasn't about her victory. It was about that woman's silence, the one who still wasn't allowed to speak. The volunteer stood frozen, unsure what to do. Jasmine finally handed him the photograph and, with a voice calm as ever, said, "Make sure they hang that up at registration next year." He took it in both hands like it was glass. From backstage, someone whispered something about needing to rearrange the panel, but no one was listening. The panel didn't matter anymore. The audience had seen too much, felt too much, believed too much to go back to normal. And as the minutes ticked forward, it became clear this wasn't a disruption. It was a reset. Kennedy, meanwhile, remained unseen. Inside a private room 2 doors down, he sat slumped in a chair, his tie loosened, his phone face down on the table. An aide stood quietly nearby, phone pressed to her ear, waiting on a statement draft that wouldn't come. Every few seconds, someone knocked gently on the door, producers, journalists, officials, but none of them were invited in. Because no matter how many microphones waited outside, John Kennedy had run out of things to say. And in Baton Rouge that day, everyone remembered not the applause, not the panel, not the theme of the conference, but the moment when a woman asked one question too impossible to ignore. "Senator, would you like to apologize to Mrs. Louise now, or should the entire room ask for you?" And in the end, the entire room did. The silence after Kennedy's retreat didn't settle. It cracked open something deeper. People weren't rushing to leave. They weren't checking their phones. They stayed seated, watching Jasmine as if something holy had just happened on that floor. Something unplanned and undeniable. The program was over. The conference was paused. But Jasmine was still standing, motionless, at the edge of the stage, holding space like it belonged to her now. And maybe for the first time all day, it actually did. Then came the shift. It started with one woman in a blue shawl, middle-aged, eyes glassy, rising slowly from her seat and making her way toward Jasmine. She didn't say anything at first. She just stepped close, reached out, and gripped Jasmine's hand with both of hers. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her voice cracking. "You didn't just speak for her. You spoke for me." Jasmine nodded gently. No smile, just a steady human acknowledgement. Then came another, and another. Within moments, people from every direction began approaching her, not like fans to a celebrity, but like citizens to a witness. Men and women, young organizers, elderly couples, business leaders with loosened ties, volunteers clutching clipboards. They came from every row, every corner, one after another, like a tide of gratitude that could no longer be held back. "Can I shake your hand? Do you have a copy of that list?" Where can I read more about the report you cited? A woman in her 70s stepped forward, clutching a battered voter registration card. I've had this since 1964, she said, her eyes never leaving Jasmine's. But I've never seen anyone fight for it the way you just did. Jasmine took the card into her hands for a second. She looked at it like it was a flag. You shouldn't have to fight to keep this, she said softly. You already earned it. A young man barely out of college came next. He looked nervous, shoulders hunched, badge still clipped to his shirt. I'm part of the organizing team, he said. I didn't know this would happen, but I'm glad it did. He paused, then added, would you let me help circulate the photo of Mrs. Louise? People need to see her. Jasmine didn't hesitate. Do it, she said. Just don't crop her out of the story. Behind him, a man in a gray suit stepped forward mid-50s, polished, the kind of person who looked like he'd never been thrown off script in his life. But now his composure had cracks. I've worked in this space for decades, he said. I've written memos. I've chaired panels. But I've never seen anything this honest on a stage. He handed Jasmine his card. Whatever you're building next, I want in. More followed. A woman handed her a worn notebook and asked Jasmine to sign it, not because she wanted a signature, but because she wanted to remember this moment actually happened. A law student pushed forward, holding her phone with a shaking hand. Can I record you reading that quote again? About silencing real ballots to stop imaginary fraud? Jasmine looked at her, gently touched the girl's wrist and said, you don't need me to repeat it. You need to be the one who says it next. The crowd didn't fade. It grew. People waited in line not for autographs, but for a moment. A moment to say thank you. A moment to ask how to help. A moment to connect with the woman who had turned a cold legislative panel into a human battlefield and walked off the stage undefeated. One man came forward holding a folded American flag. I served overseas, he said. Came back thinking my job was done. But today reminded me it isn't. He looked at her, voice raw. Let me carry something for you. Anything. Jasmine put a hand on his shoulder. Then carry the next conversation, she said. The one people still don't want to have. Nearby, two members of the event staff, both of them visibly shaken, approached with a box of leftover folders. Would you like to distribute your materials through the info table? One asked. We can make sure they get to every exit. Jasmine nodded. Yes, but print more copies. Not just for this room, for every room like it. I had a group of attendees who had been silent all day now huddled around a legal pad, asking Jasmine if they could host a follow-up event in their district. It doesn't have to be partisan, one of them said. It just has to be real. Jasmine looked down at the growing stack of business cards and phone numbers in her hand. Her face didn't show exhaustion, it showed weight. She had carried the truth through fire, and now people were asking to help hold it. It wasn't just a personal moment anymore. It had become collective. And yet, even in the gratitude, there was an ache. Several people, not many, but enough, approached her not with excitement, but apology. I didn't believe you when you walked in, said one man, older, wearing a badge from a corporate sponsor. I thought you were here to make noise, but you made sense. I was wrong. Jasmine looked him dead in the eye. It's not about me being right, she said. It's about who gets to be heard before it's too late. A few feet away, a mother knelt beside her teenage daughter, gently nudging her forward. The girl clutched a folded piece of paper. Jasmine leaned down. I want to write a school paper about you, the girl said, shy but steady. I didn't know voting could be taken. Jasmine placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. Write about Mrs. Louise, she said. Write about someone who gave everything and got nothing back. Then promise me you'll never let that be your story. The girl nodded. Her mother cried. By now, the event hall had become a living memorial, not somber, but awake. People moved differently, spoke differently, as if the floor they stood on had shifted beneath them and was never going back to level. And through it all, Jasmine remained grounded, not because she was the center of it, but because she was still holding the weight of those who weren't in the room. Mrs. Louise. The 19 names. The voices rejected without a microphone. She wasn't basking in praise. She was absorbing responsibility. And as one final attendee reached out to shake her hand, saying, "Thank you for showing up even when you weren't invited," Jasmine answered without pause, I wasn't there for permission. I was there because someone had to be. The hallway outside still crackled with leftover applause and hushed arguments, but behind a heavy door at the end of a narrow corridor, the world went small and airless. The room was windowless, carpet thick, lights too white, a conference table stretching like a runway no one wanted to walk. Jackets were off, ties pulled loose, water glasses half sweated and untouched. Phones hummed on vibrate, screens lighting faces with a cold blue. No cameras, no public. Just the sound of breathing and the soft whir of the air vent that could not clear the heat in the room. Kennedy sat at the head of the table, posture rigid, the knot of his tie pressed against his throat like a thumb. An aide slipped a tablet in front of him and stepped back. Hands at his sides, eyes lowered. Another placed a printout of the day's agenda next to the tablet, useless now. A relic from a morning that already felt like last year. The program's neat bullet points, keynote, panel. Luncheon might as well have been written for a different event, a different universe. The table smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and panic. No one spoke first. Finally, his senior assistant broke the silence, voice low but steady, resignation hanging off each syllable. "Sir, no one cares about the speech anymore." The words landed with a dull, merciless weight. He didn't mean it to cut, but it cut anyway. Two staffers exhaled at the same time, as if those 7 words had loosened a strap across everyone's chest. Kennedy didn't look up. He watched the tablet's lock screen glow, then go black, then glow again, the pulse of a flatline. The assistant swallowed as if the room had dryness for a ceiling. "We can salvage some of the agenda," he said, softer now, like you talk to someone on a cliff. But the room flipped. It wasn't a skirmish. It was a turn. He stopped himself there, as if the next sentence would be treason. Kennedy's jaw flexed once, twice. A political advisor, older, careful, the kind who had built careers out of fires they didn't start, slid into the space the silence left open. "We need to take the oxygen out of it," she said, fingers laced, knuckles pale. "You retract the line about disruption, or you apologize. Publicly, quickly. We own the moment before it owns us." She leaned forward, holding his gaze. A clean apology lowers pressure. It interrupts the story. It signals control. Her tone never trembled. The room did. Kennedy didn't answer. He tapped the tablet awake and swiped with a thumb that looked steadier than it felt. The screen bloomed with a paused frame. Jasmine on the floor, just off the stage, hand lifted not in threat, not in victory, but in presentation toward the photograph of Mrs. Louise. In the background, faces were turned, rapt, guilty, spellbound. He pressed play. The room listened to a moment they had already lived and were not ready to relive. Another advisor tried a different door. "We can frame this around process," he offered, voice rehearsed but earnest. "Security protocols were breached. She wasn't scheduled. We emphasized decorum, order, the sanctity of the program." He looked around for agreement and found none. "We can make it about rules," he insisted, weaker now. "People respect rules." The legal counsel's head tilted, a warning more than a gesture. The counsel spoke carefully, as though each word might trigger something. "With respect, the verification call is the problem," she said. "It exists. It's on audio. A public record confirms the denial. If you argue process, it sounds like you're arguing against the facts." She folded her hands, a verdict in human form. "Optics and substance both run against us. The only path that reduces harm is acknowledgement." The room accepted it without liking it. Kennedy let the campaign clip roll next. His own face, his own voice from 2022, sleeves rolled up, promise polished to a shine. "I promise you this: no lawful voter will be denied their right to vote in the state of Louisiana." He closed his eyes for half a second and heard it twice, once from the speakers, once from memory. There are lines you say to win a room, and lines that shackle you to their echo. This one did both. He hit pause just before his past self smiled. A junior staffer, too young to be jaded and too scared to be quiet, lifted his head. "Sir, there's still a door here," he said, voice thin but brave. "Not a big one, but a door. You can say, 'I was presented new information, and I'm concerned. I'm asking for a review of procedures to ensure no lawful voter. He stopped when he saw the advisor's glance. Or, he added quickly, we prepare a full apology. Tonight. His phone buzzed on the table, lighting the name of a donor he did not answer. Sir, no one cares about the speech anymore, the assistant repeated softer, as if repetition might make the truth less sharp. They only remember the call, the clip, and that photograph. He didn't say the woman's name, maybe out of respect, maybe out of fear that saying it would summon the image again. It didn't matter. The photo was in the room even when it wasn't on the screen. It was in the way everyone avoided an empty chair, as if someone sat there already. Kennedy's thumb pressed the screen again. The audio from the registrar's office filled the room. Clinical, indifferent, fatal. Yes, we can confirm. Mrs. Louise was not allowed to vote because her documents didn't match. The incident was formally recorded. The stale office air felt colder. The counsel looked down at her legal pad and drew a small box in the corner, then another inside it, the quiet geometry of dread. The advisor pressed her palms together until they whitened. A communications director slid a draft statement across the table, 3 paragraphs, tight sentences, verbs built for retreat. This admits nothing we cannot support, he promised. It expresses concern, requests clarification, reiterates your commitment to lawful voters. We can post it within the hour and brief local press. He paused, then offered the line that sounded like a lifeline and a trap. You can add, I am sorry. It goes farther. The room waited for the echo that never came. Kennedy stared at the screen where Jasmine stood with her arm extended toward the image of Mrs. Louise. The gesture wasn't grand. It was spare, exact, a scalpel of a hand. He rewound 5 seconds, then 5 more, then froze the frame so the moment sharpened to a point that felt like it pressed against his ribs. He imagined the floor from where she stood, the carpets give under her heel, the slight shake of the microphone in her fist, the decision to hold her ground and not climb the stage. Detail by detail, the scene returned with a clarity that stripped away the theater and left the judgment. Another advisor tried to offer heat where there was only ice. You've survived tougher than this, he said, meaning it. This is a night, not a narrative. We punch back with policy and patience. He smiled in the way men smile when they're lost on purpose. We schedule a listening session. We bring priests and principals. We make it communal. The counsel lifted her eyes. After an apology, she said. The advisor looked away. The assistant stepped closer, voice barely above a breath. Sir, we need direction. It was not a challenge. It was a plea from someone who had carried too many bags through too many hallways. We need one sentence. We'll build the rest. He gestured gently to the tablet. Or we can keep playing it until it gives us one. His laugh died as soon as it was born. The room had no use for jokes. Kennedy's hand hovered, then descended. The video rolled a final time. Jasmine's voice did not rise in triumph. It settled like a verdict. Senator, would you like to apologize to Mrs. Louise now, or should the entire room ask for you? He waited for the familiar wave of anger to surface, the one that steadied him, fueled him, let him swing. It didn't come. In its place, an absence. The hollow awareness of a promise meeting a fact and losing in public. He set the tablet down as if returning a delicate instrument after the operation had already failed. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, eyes shut, the gesture of a man searching for a sentence that would not arrive. The advisor opened her mouth to speak and closed it again. The legal counsel placed a single page in front of him. Recommended actions immediate. Bullet points lined up like exits on a wall with no door. The top line read, apologize, unequivocally. No one moved. The room's clock ticked, the sound too loud for something so small. In the hallway, muffled footsteps passed and faded. A ghostly reminder that the world outside was still moving, even if this room was not. The assistant stared at the tabletop's reflection of the overhead lights as if they might blink a message in Morse. The communications director folded his hands over the draft as if heat could force ink into action. Kennedy leaned back, eyes open now, but fixed on the frozen frame of Jasmine in the photograph. The angle of her wrist, the tilt of her chin, the empty chair in the front row that had never been empty again. He did not nod. He did not speak. He did not reach for the statement or for the door. He watched the screen the way a man watches a horizon he cannot reach. "Sir?" the assistant whispered, one final prompt as gentle as gravity. No answer came. Kennedy didn't respond. He kept looking at the video of Jasmine lifting her hand toward Mrs. Louise. A motion so simple it had become a sentence. The tablet screen dimmed and brightened, refusing to fade without permission. His grip tightened on the arm of the chair, the leather creaking under his fingers. Around him, every plan waited to be chosen. Inside him, not a single word would move. The private room where Kennedy sat silent felt a world away. 2 days later, New Orleans opened its doors and let the air move again. The city did not whisper, it breathed, slow and steady, like a chest that had just come up from deep water. Live oaks along Claiborne held the heat. Streetcars hummed through the afternoon, and a brass line faint in the distance threaded the day with rhythm. People did not come to be entertained. They came to be instructed, to be armed, to be seen. And they came because a woman had turned 1 minute into a weapon. The community center in Treme filled before sunset, folding chairs lined in tight rows, fans chopping the heavy air. Church ushers directed elders to the front, organizers stacked clipboards and pens by the door, and a long table held pitchers of water sweating onto paper napkins. The first to arrive were block captains, then teachers, then young canvassers with stickers on their shirts and ink on their fingers. A pastor from the 9th Ward shook hands with a retired nurse from Gentilly, both of them speaking in the short, efficient sentences of people who know what work looks like. A barbershop owner brought 3 apprentices, told them to listen, then listen harder. The hall felt like a living map of the city stitched together by purpose. Jasmine did not enter through a backstage or a side door. She walked in with everyone else, no entourage. Oh, no podium, waiting with her name. She wore black again, simple and clean, nothing to distract from the point she had come to deliver. When she took the front, she did not climb the stage. She stood at floor level, eye to eye with the first row. The room quieted without being told to. Stillness fell like a sheet being laid over a bed, smooth final. An elder from the NAACP chapter stepped forward to welcome her, voice low, cadence measured, every syllable carrying both age and authority. He spoke about names on rolls and names erased, about forms that change every year, and buses that do not run on Sundays. He thanked the church coalition, the sorority chapters, the youth canvassers who knock until their knuckles ache, then knock again. Then he turned to Jasmine, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said what everyone had come to say without words. "Now teach us how to fight what we can prove." The room answered with a single, steady clap that grew into a wall of sound, then settled back to silence. Jasmine nodded once and began. "I do not need a stage to have a voice," she said, plain and clear, letting each word find its own place in the air. "I only need a moment and a truth that cannot be forgotten." The line did not land like a slogan. It landed like a vow. It reminded the crowd of what they had seen and what they had felt. That truth does not knock, it enters when someone opens the door. Heads lifted. Pens weighted over paper as if the sentence itself might be a map. She told them exactly what she had carried into Baton Rouge, the affidavit numbers, the incident logs, the criteria that looked neutral on paper and cruel in practice. She showed copies of rejection slips, names obscured, reasons circled so the harm could be seen without being exploited. She broke down the difference between identification and restriction, between guidance and gatekeeping. She explained how a rule becomes a wall when you move it a fraction of an inch and call the shift clarity. She did not raise her voice. She sharpened it, and it cut through noise the way a clean edge moves through rope. From the side table, volunteers passed stacks of packets, step-by-step guides for first-time voters, lists of acceptable documents beyond a driver's license, scripts for phone banks that focus on elders and first-time registrants. There were maps of early voting sites, bus lines drawn in highlighter, and blank lines for neighbors willing to drive neighbors. A young woman asked about provisional ballots and what to do if a poll worker says no with a smile. Jasmine answered like a field medic, fast, specific, unflinching. Document it. Ask for a supervisor. Write the time, the name, the booth number. Leave a paper trail that cannot be swept. A deacon stood to ask about voters displaced after storms, their mail scattered, their leases temporary, their names floating between zip codes. Jasmine laid out the pathways, church addresses as mailing points, affidavits that carry one's history, community witnesses who step up and stand behind a signature. She told them how to turn Sunday rides into Monday registrations, how to build a chain that no single link could break. She looked at the row of elders and said, "You are documents. Let the system see you, hear you, record you." The room murmured a soft sound that meant assent. A young canvasser scribbled a star in the margin of his notes. Then she shifted from defense to offense. She talked about pre-commit calls the week before an election, accountability calendars for poll judges, and rapid response teams that stand by when a precinct runs mysteriously short on forms. She asked the pastors to loan out their ushers as line stewards on election day, the fraternity chapters to run water stations, and the brass bands to play at early voting sites because joy brings bodies to doors. She told the barbers and stylists to post "Bring your ID" signs where men and women see them with their reflection. Make preparation part of the culture, she said. Turn showing up into a ritual. During a pause, the retired nurse from Gentilly raised her hand and asked about people who fear they will be embarrassed at the table. Jasmine met her eyes. "We do not send them alone," she said. "Not anymore. Pair them with a neighbor. Walk in together. If a poll worker tries to shame them into silence, stand right there and say, 'We have time today.'" The nurse nodded, eyes bright, jaw set. The people around her wrote "We have time today" in the top margin of their packet. Someone asked about legal support as a last line of defense. A young attorney from Algiers, sitting cross-legged on the floor, raised his hand before Jasmine could answer. "We will staff a hotline," he said. "We'll put numbers on wristbands, on church bulletins, on paper fans." Jasmine pointed to him and told the room to add his number to their phone trees. "No one fights alone," she said, and the words carried a weight that made them sound like law. The evening stretched without losing force. Questions led to tactics. Tactics led to commitments. Commitments turned into names on sheets, rides on calendars, and dates inked on knuckles. A grandmother promised to bring 10 voters from her block, then corrected herself and said 12. A high school senior volunteered to run a table at Friday night football and collect 30 registrations before halftime. The sorority presidents nodded in unison and claimed 3 zip codes. When the ushers took a break, the brass line outside grew louder for a minute, as if the city itself were keeping time. At one point, a boy no older than 12 stood and asked why the woman in the picture had to wait outside the polling place. The room hushed as if a bell had been rung. Jasmine did not simplify the answer or wrap it in mercy. "Because a rule was written to be obeyed instead of understood," she said, "and because no one in that room chose courage over comfort." She waited a beat and added, "That is why we are here, so the next time a rule tries to write someone out, the room chooses courage." The boy sat down taller than he had stood. When the questions slowed, Jasmine returned to the simple truth that had carried her through the storm. "I do not need a stage to have a voice," she repeated, as if testing the line against the wooden floorboards beneath her feet. "I only need a moment and a truth that cannot be forgotten." The crowd did not cheer. They absorbed it, the way the city absorbs rain, deep, patient, inexorable. It sounded less like a line and more like instructions on how to breathe underwater. People moved forward to the front, not to crowd her, but to gather the tools they needed. Hands reached for packets, then reached for each other. Someone started a sign-up for Sunday rides. Someone else created a list for door knock captains and wrote 9th Ward in thick marker. A young mother promised to bring snacks for volunteers and wrote peanut-free in parentheses. It felt less like a meeting and more like the first hour of a build. As the night drew down, the elder from the MRNACP stepped forward once more. He looked at Jasmine, then at the people, then at the exit doors that would soon open into a humid, humming street. His voice did not rise, but it filled the room. "You came to open a door that many of us have been knocking on for too long," he said. "Tonight, you showed us the latch." A hush followed, full, grateful, resolute. The words that took hold were not shouted. They were passed hand to hand, street to street, house to house. They called her something that fit not just the scene in Baton Rouge, but the work unfolding now in daylight, in church basements, in living rooms with the TV off, and the kitchen light on. They called her the door opener for silenced voices. Not a title, a job, a mandate. When the folding chairs stacked and the water pitchers emptied, Jasmine remained a minute longer, watching the last packet find a last pair of hands. She did not linger for praise or pose for a staged photo. She checked that the hotline number was on the front page, that the bus maps had the updated routes, that the what to bring line was in bold. She pressed palms with the attorney from Algiers, hugged the nurse from Gentilly, and told the boy from earlier to hold the city to its courage. Outside, the brass line found its way past the corner, horns bright against the night. The door swung open, and the heat met the room like an eager friend. People spilled onto the sidewalk with clipboards and plans, their steps quick, their voices low, their faces set. The work did not begin tomorrow. It had started already, with a sentence, a packet, a number, a ride. And as the community center lights clicked off one by one, the nickname followed her into the street, soft but unshakable, spoken like a promise they intended to keep. The door opener for silenced voices. The name door opener followed Jasmine like an echo, but she didn't linger in front of cameras or chase headlines. Reporters crowded her with requests, leaving voicemails that piled up like bricks. She brushed them aside with the same steady answer. No interviews. She wasn't retreating. She was choosing where her words belonged. And she chose a small elementary school in New Orleans, a place where the walls smelled of crayons and chalk, not politics. The principal greeted her at the front, both relieved and anxious, as though a storm and sunlight had arrived together. Inside the modest auditorium, folding chairs squeaked as restless students found their seats. Teachers stood along the walls, eyes sharp and full of quiet expectation. Jasmine stepped to the front without a stage, without a microphone. She wanted no barriers between herself and the children. The chatter ebbed into silence, curiosity pulling the room tight around her. She began softly telling them about courage, not campaigns. Sometimes the truth makes people angry, she said, answering a girl's question with the honesty of someone who had lived it. But sometimes it makes people remember who they are. Heads lifted, even the teachers leaned closer. A boy asked if you needed permission to speak in important rooms. Jasmine's reply was crisp. You need respect, and when they won't give it, you bring your own. Then came the line she had carried for them, the gift she refused to spend on television crews. Her voice did not rise, it settled like stone. Truth doesn't need a ticket. It only needs someone brave enough to pick up the microphone, even for 1 minute. The words hung in the still air, simple enough for children to repeat, heavy enough for adults to hold. For a moment, the whole room felt stitched together by silence. When the bell rang, the spell didn't break. The children crowded forward, not to clamor, but to thank her. One boy traded her a pencil for her pen. She told him to write something that scared him and read it out loud. A girl pressed a drawing into her hand, a stick figure holding a microphone too big for its body. That's you, the girl said. Jasmine smiled. It can be you. She left without ceremony, slipping into the humid street where no cameras waited, but her sentence traveled faster than any headline. It passed from porches to barbershops, from church bulletins to kitchen tables. People repeated it not like a slogan, but like instructions. Truth doesn't need a ticket, they told one another. Just one person brave enough to pick up the microphone. And in that repetition, the story became more than a moment, it became a spark that refused to go out. The spark did not die in that school auditorium, it grew teeth. What began as a quiet sentence whispered among children started to echo in kitchens, union halls, and church basements. The people carried it like a drumbeat, steady and unrelenting, and Jasmine knew the time for whispers was over. The truth had walked into the room. Now it needed to march. She stood before a crowd gathered under a sweltering Louisiana sun, not behind glass or velvet ropes, but shoulder to shoulder with the very people who had once been turned away from the polls. Her voice didn't waver. It struck like a hammer on steel. We cannot wait for permission. We cannot wait for comfort. We cannot wait for leaders who tell us change will come. Someday. Someday is not a date on the calendar. It's the excuse of cowards, and I will not accept it. The crowd roared, the kind of sound that makes walls tremble. She pointed to them not as an audience, but as an army. If you can drive, then drive your neighbors to the polls. If you can write, then write the truth where lies have lived too long. If you can stand, then stand guard at the doors where justice has been denied. Do not leave here with clapping hands and empty hearts. Leave here ready to fight, because democracy does not survive on speeches, it survives on action. Her words cracked the air, fierce and undeniable. The people answered back with a wave of fists raised high, not in anger but in unity. The truth no longer belonged to Jasmine alone. It belonged to everyone within reach of her voice. And together they were no longer asking, they were moving. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.